If you want to be a drunk, why don't you just go over to Montezuma Street and stop hurting your family? Devon Wayt joins us from Circa Behavioral Healthcare Solutions. He talks about the journey of finding recovery, relapsing, ignoring the typical advice to avoid relationships for the first year, and about getting involved in the operations side of the industry. He talks about consulting and advocating in the treatment industry. Enjoy. Welcome to the Illuminate Recovery podcast. We shed light on mental health issues, mental illness, and addiction recovery. Ways to cope, manage, and inspire. Beyond the self-care we will discuss, you may need the help of a licensed professional. My name's Kurt Nider. I'm a husband, a father, entrepreneur, a handyman, and a student of life. I avoid conflict, I deflect with humor, and I'm fascinated by the human experience.
And I'm Shelley Mangum. I am a clinical mental health counselor, and my favorite role of all times is grandma. I am a seeker of truth, and I feel like life should be approached with tremendous curiosity.
I ask the dumb questions.
I fill in the gaps.
The Illuminate Recovery podcast is brought to you by Illuminate Billing Advocates. Make billing and collection simple with leader in substance abuse and mental health billing services. Verification and analysis of benefits, pre-authorizations, utilization management, accurate claim submission and management, denial and appeal management, and industry-leading reporting. Improve your practice's cash flow and your ability to help your clients with Illuminate Billing Advocates.
Devon Wayt, who is an MBA and is founder and CEO of Circa Behavioral Healthcare Solutions. Devon is with Kurt and I today, and we're super happy to have him. Devon's leadership philosophy is based on the understanding that leadership itself takes practice. He believes that everyone can be a leader, and the best leadership skills include ethical application of honesty, authenticity, transparency, integrity, and a commitment to self-respect and learning by example. Those qualities and skills definitely caught my attention. Devon, thank you so much for being on today and being willing to talk with us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I know that, as we were kind of getting ready to start recording, we had some pretty good conversation about some of the things that you're doing. So I'm really anxious to listen and learn more about Circa and what Circa's doing. But maybe just to start out, let's get a little bit of background from you of what got you here where you're at now, what got you working in the recovery space, and maybe some of your own journey there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Shelley, and thank you, Kurt. Yeah, I came into the field of treatment through obtaining treatment myself. I grew up on a 72-acre cattle ranch in southwestern Colorado, which was in a town of 400 people in the population, and it's now 800. And I had a great upbringing, really learned the value of work, working on a ranch. My grandpa really didn't allow us to have summers off. Me and my brother, it was, we were building fences and doing stuff around the ranch, which looking back, it was great. I remember being a little jealous of some of my friends that lived in town that could, swim and play and have fun and all that stuff. But we had the lake and, a lake on the property, a little pond, and we made the best of it. So, but I say all that because I really grew up in a wonderful family. They were very supportive of me and, showed me the, just great values, but I still found my way into, going overboard with alcohol and drugs. And that started with some experimenting pretty young, just, through peer pressure and all that, or the opportunity. I shouldn't even say peer pressure. It's just the opportunity was there. And so I always wanted to get out of the small town. It was a dream of mine. And a lot of our friends went to college in neighboring cities. Some of that was like Denver or Phoenix, Arizona was somewhat close. Those were kind of the two hubs. And I actually made my way over to Phoenix, Arizona, but that was after really deciding to leave my family's home because my alcohol use had got to the point where they said, "Look, you're not going to be able to do that here in this house with us." And so, of course, my head said, "Okay, well then I'll leave," and I did. So I left, and I was able to graduate high school, which was wonderful. And then I went over to Phoenix on the thought that I would do graphic design over there. There was a graphic design school, and so I was able to get into it, but I certainly didn't go to school because I got into heavier drugs rather than just alcohol over in Phoenix. There was more of an opportunity for that there. And unfortunately, the one person I knew over there was into heavy drug use. And so I had already crossed those boundaries where that's what I was into as well too. So I remember using, it was methamphetamine at the time I was using. And I remember my friend told me, he said, "Well, once you use this, you're never going to be able to stop." And I remember thinking, gosh, that doesn't sound great, but I did it anyway, and so I was 19 years old, and things were just not going well for me at all. I wasn't holding down a career. I had already been kicked out of school, and my family came and visited me, and I remember them telling me, I think we're going to have you go into a mental health facility is what they called it. And I was just appalled that would even cross their, hemisphere thought process. I remember, and I said, I don't have mental health issues, and I was thinking more of like a sanitarium, type of facility. And so I just kept doing what I was doing, and but then they did a surprise intervention on me, and they brought a lot of my friends there, and they had a facility set up, and it was a really good intervention. I don't remember the details of it really, but they gave me the ultimatum, and I said yes. And the next step I remember was I was in the car on my way to the treatment center. So, but I remember going there, and I said, "How long am I going to be for?" And they said 4 weeks, and I went, 4 weeks, I thought in my head, well, I've got all this stuff to do, and I had nothing going on, so I went to that treatment center. It was called Cottonwood de Tucson in Tucson, Arizona. And, I come from a small, humble upbringing, the ranch. My grandpa was a rancher, but my mother and father were educators. My father was an administrator in the elementary school system, and then my mother taught the hearing impaired and deaf, and taught sign language and all that. And so they certainly didn't have, back then, this was in 1999, I want to say, and there really wasn't, access to insurance at the time as far back as I can remember. And so it was cash pay, and I don't know how they swung it, but it was probably my college tuition, that went to that. But in retrospect, I never would have made it through college had I not gone to treatment. So that was my first experience with treatment. I was introduced to a variety of self-help modalities while I was there in terms of, different meetings, meeting types and all that. And I really had a good experience. So I didn't start working in treatment after that, though. I ended up coming to California for aftercare, and I had a wonderful counselor that was there. Her name was Mary, and I looked up to her, and she was wonderful. But I remember she said, "Well, you're going to have to choose the next step." And she said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to go to school, because I'd really botched that opportunity in Phoenix. And so I remember she was talking to me about going to a collegiate recovery community. I believe it was out of Austin, Texas, with over at UT Austin. And she showed me a brochure, and then she showed me a brochure of Sober Living by the Sea, which is a treatment center in Newport Beach, California. And I looked at that peninsula with those palm trees, and I said, I want to go there. So that's actually how I moved to California, and I've been in California ever since. But I went through a program there, and they had a program called the Teach program, which allowed you to do residential treatment and go to school at the same time. And it was a lower, stage of treatment. And I had already gone through an intensive program, and it was really good. I met a lot of great people, but I'll tell you, on that journey to recovery, because I didn't have drugs and alcohol to fill whatever void I was still working on, I navigated towards relationships, and I got into a relationship with another client that was there. And in spite of everybody telling me not to and all the reasons why I shouldn't. And unfortunately, what it did is I didn't work on myself in retrospect as much as I could, because I was worried about, looking good and all that, in this relationship. And so I really learned what not to do in treatment. And I've had a long career in treatment, so I like to tell people that. But to make a long story short, I ended up relapsing. It's a very unfortunate story, but it's just a part of my story. And it was we decided to go on a snowboarding trip, me and my girlfriend and another friend we had all completed treatment, and we were trying to support each other. But, I felt like I had this great foundation of recovery underneath me. And it was kind of a last minute trip. And we went up to a local mountain to go snowboarding. We rented a cabin and all that. And my girlfriend at the time, I remember she really wanted to order sake with the sushi. We were eating sushi. And me and the other person were like, no, don't do that. And it should have been a concern to me, right, that she wanted to relapse. But that was my girlfriend, and I wanted to, support her. So we're trying to, say no and all that. At some point, we turned, we just flipped, and so we ended up having sake, and then it was on. So it was so interesting how quickly that happened. And in retrospect, I can see how I was on the road to relapse, and on that road, there were many things along the way that led me to that point where I was in a vulnerable enough, place, just personally, to go ahead and relapse. And so I did stay relapsed for a couple of months. I had tried to tell everybody that I was sober, and there were plenty of people that did not believe me, but I had plenty of people I thought fooled as well. And so when it was time for me, and this was unfortunately for 2.5 years, and I got back into recovery, and this was November of 2002, November 4th of 2002, and that same treatment center, Sober Living by the Sea, they had a all men's intensive inpatient program in Riverside, California, and my counselor had gone out there to become the program manager or program director. And so I stayed in touch with him, and when I needed help again, he said, you need to come here. And I'll tell you, my family was done with me. By the time they knew what had happened, they were really saying, hey, this is it, Devon. If you can't get it here, you're really on your own. And that's exactly what I needed to hear from them. And so there was a time when I left California, went back to visit Colorado, my hometown, and I wasn't sober. This was right before I went into treatment and got sober. And it was just deep, demoralizing, when you hear the term incomprehensible demoralization, that was that moment for me. I just was not healthy. I couldn't hold it together. And I had broken up with that girlfriend. And, and because I wasn't comfortable with myself, I had put all of myself into that relationship. And so when the rug was, pulled out in terms of the relationship, I just lost my identity, lost who I was. And boy, I tell you, that was just a dark time for me. So when my father drove me to California, and then I entered into the treatment center, that was when the tables turned. And so I had looked back and thought of all the reasons why I had relapsed, and really, tried to do what I didn't do the first time. And I'll tell you, one of the things was, the best thing for me was to go to an all-male treatment center. And what happened is I just ended up staying there. I really connected with the program and a couple of local self-help groups and all that. And they told me, hey, if you want to stick around and volunteer, you're more than welcome to. I stayed for 60 days of treatment. And then I volunteered for a couple of months. And the counselor who was my ex-counselor, that was the program director, he ended up telling me, hey, if you go out and get your commercial driver's license, maybe you could drive a van and take people to meetings and all that. So I did. And the day I remember I got the driver's license, they hired me. And that was March 18th of 2003. And I've been working in the industry ever since. So that's how I got here.
Mm. Well, and you started right at the very beginning where most recovering people dealing with addiction have to start there if they want to be in the addiction recovery world, right?
Yeah. I've worked with many addiction professionals over the years, and a lot of them are in recovery, or they've got some higher purpose of working in the field. And it's wonderful to be able to identify with our own experience. And I will say too that it's also a nice balance to have people that aren't necessarily in recovery, but have the passion and the higher purpose of that work that they do as well, usually because of family member or some other type of experience that they had. But yeah, it's great having that experience.
As I was listening to your story and talking about, at a young age when you started drinking and how you talked about being in a town of 400 people out on the ranch and working out there. And in my mind, I'm thinking, isn't that the very kind of a place that parents will move their kids when they're having problems?
Yeah,
And I don't think you can move to enough places to avoid addiction when that's part of your experience. It really has to come down to doing those, learning the steps, or learning what recovery is and looking at those drivers of that and the underlying things. So that thought crossed my mind. I also was wondering, and maybe you've wondered this as well, how long do you think you would have stayed in your addiction had your family not done an intervention?
That's a great question. And it's hard for me to say because I see people get sober all the time, which is, a huge benefit of working in treatment and recovery. But I don't know. I believe I was the type of person, or I am the type of person that needed some type of intervention. So unfortunately, it probably would have come through law enforcement or, some type of negative consequence. And I'm just grateful that, that I didn't hurt anybody. But with addiction, oftentimes, before we get into recovery, we end up hurting the ones we love the most. And in fact, on that demoralizing experience I had when I went back to visit home before going into treatment, I did have an opportunity to meet with a therapist. My grandma had set me up with a friend who was a therapist, and they were just willing to talk to me. It wasn't, really a formal session that I knew of. I just went and talked with the gentleman, but he was great, and he really turned he did a little reverse psychology on me, I guess. But there we were near Native American reservation, and unfortunately they have a very large alcohol problem, and oftentimes don't allow alcohol on the reservation. So to utilize alcohol, the people that live on the reservation will come over to the town, and they end up, if you get drunk, there's this street called Montezuma Street where a lot of people would get drunk and just kind of sleep in the park. And the therapist told me, he said, well, Devon, if you want to be a drunk, and why don't you just go over there on Montezuma Street and hang out with everybody, but just stop hurting your family. And for some reason that it got me, and I'm sure other people had asked, had put that in my mind before, but it did stick with me at that time. So that was kind of the road to recovery for me, just like there was a road to relapse. And if I look back, there were signs and things that I was doing, like the relationship that led me down that path. There was these signs, that led me to recovery, where these little light bulbs came on, and I'm really grateful for those people. But what I will say is, I think a person's ready when they're ready to listen, because I had that same message, maybe put in different ways, given to me before, but I was ready to listen. So I don't really know when I would have been ready to listen had I not had some intervention.
What about his statement stuck out to you? Was it the picturing yourself, in the park with the other drunks, or was it the causing pain to the family? Which part was it that stuck out to you?
Yeah, I think it was causing pain to the family. I was very, very close with my grandmother and grandfather, and feel very fortunate about that. That was on my father's side, and they both passed on now. And in fact, when I did get sober in 2003, my grandfather, I got sober in November, and then he passed away in February. And he had been battling cancer for years, but one of his wishes was that, interesting enough, one of them was that I got out of that relationship. He felt like that relationship was really bad for me, and it was. When you put two unhealthy people together, it certainly doesn't make a healthy relationship. But it was to stop. He said creating smoke screens. He wrote me a letter. I'll never forget what it said, and it was stop creating smoke screens for your family. And what that meant was stop lying to your mom and dad. And then the last was to get clean and sober. And so, that was just another sign along the road to recovery. And so it really hurt me to know I was hurting them. And, my grandfather had been battling cancer for 10 years prior to when he finally succumbed to it. He had a type of cancer called sarcoma cancer. And so I love my family very, 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 very much. And I have the family now and carry that same love forward. So that was it. That got me, hurting the family.
I love that. That's the way you share that, and I love that you answered my question, even though it really wasn't a fair question. As to who knows how long you would have stayed in addiction and in that pattern without intervention. But it's an interesting question to look at. But I like the way you were able to pick those pivotal moments of things that your grandfather said, and things that the counselor said, and things that really set you up to say yes during that intervention, because not everybody says yes, and not everybody's willing to say yes, but you did. And I think for people that that are thinking about recovery, that's probably one of the most important things, is despite the fear and the addiction that says you'll die if you stop using, it's that courage to be able to say yes to help.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right. It's a great way to put it.
And I think that you put this quite well, is doesn't matter how often you tell someone a relationship in the first year or so of recovery is probably a really bad idea, it still seems to be something that, like you said, we kind of tend to shift from one addiction to another, but not really recognizing that's what we're doing. And we can look at that and say, yeah, we made bad choices, but how else are you going to learn those things without going through those experiences? And so, sometimes we judge that was just a bad choice or a bad moment, but I would say that what you learned from that experience was probably more valuable than anything else.
Yeah, I agree with you. I really do. And those experiences are what an individual can take and then, impart onto others who are getting into recovery, and, help come down to, meet the individual at the level that they're at. And whether or not they're willing to hear you or not, that's not on us, right? That's on them. It's just our responsibility to have the message there and help them however we can. And that comes in a variety of ways, right? Sometimes it's through boundaries but I really loved working in treatment. When I started working, I just really I felt like I found my spot, and I really thought about becoming a clinician, but it just didn't, I don't think I had the knack for it, really. I love talking about recovery and helping people, but I always ended up working with really good clinicians, and I just saw the work they did and really admired it, but realized that I wasn't that person that would be capable of doing that. So I've made a pretty good career out of surrounding myself with really good people that work in the field. And I had a wonderful experience. I wanted to tell you too, at that treatment center, they had a staff housing trailer on the property. It was a 11-acre ranch, just kind of, which is ironic, but the ranch itself, it had a staff trailer, and I ended up staying there for 2 years. So I stayed in the staff trailer, and then I worked. And if anything, I would say, a relationship or anything like that. I've always tried to eat somewhat healthy. I've had my bouts, and it's just I'll make it personal, can get into cross addiction and things like that. So because I have that type of personality, I try to do healthier things. But I stayed out of a relationship. But I would say I ended up working a lot. I already had a pretty good work ethic, but if anything, I've had to work on that over the years. It's just watching how much I worked, to make sure that I dedicate, time to myself, and obviously now time to my family. But I've only worked at 2 treatment centers, and I've been in the field for 18 years, and it'll be 19 in March. And the first one was there. I ended up just getting into like operations management. And I had gone to school at Pepperdine University, which was, I was seeing a therapist at the time. And, in recovery, we have to do that, right? I had to take care of myself. In fact, as I was learning management, I had my program director, or the executive director who was my boss, and a lead counselor approach me and say, Devon, you're going to have to take care of yourself. I was working too much. I wasn't delegating as well as I could. And I was really, suffering on the inside by just through stress and stuff like that. And I tried to go back to school, and, it just took a lot on my plate. But I started seeing this therapist, and he had told me that I should check out Pepperdine. So I was always grateful to him for doing that. His name was Dr. Patrick McAfee, and he's passed on now. But I was going to Riverside Community College at the time, just, getting the foundation for school in. And I got the reps down where I was able to do school and, go to meetings and have, work and do somewhat of a balance with all of that. And I remember going to the admissions counselor there at Pepperdine, and she was saying, I was doing my associate's degree, and I wanted to enter a bachelor's program with them, and she was like, well, you can join. She checked all the boxes and said it's time. And I said, no, I've got to finish and get my associate's degree from Riverside Community College. And she let me do that the first time. I could tell it kind of bothered her. I couldn't put a finger on it really. But then the second time when I saw her, and I'm grateful to her for this, and she was, I kind of looked at it was like she channeled my grandma or something. But I remember she slammed her hand down on the table, and she said, now, Devon, you're just procrastinating. And she said, would a future employer, appreciate that you got your associate's degree from Riverside Community College, or would they enjoy, that you're working on your bachelor's degree from Pepperdine? And the light bulb came on. So I entered into that program and started a master's program right after that. It was actually a joint program where you could do your bachelor's and your master's next to each other. And it was a cohort of us that decided to do that and to go through with it. But fulfilling that education, NAC, was really, it was important to me. My family were all educators. And so I had to, all the funds that would have gone to education, so I was doing it on my own, and that was really good for me as well too. And so I ended up getting the bachelor's degree and wanting to move up in the organization I was at, but my mentor and boss, who was this executive director, was very honest with me and just said, Devon, I think you've capped out, what you can do here. And so it was very mutual that I started putting my resume out there. And I ended up moving over to a treatment center called Northbound Treatment Services in Southern California, and that was in 2010. And while I was at the other treatment center, I had learned a little bit about compliance. There, I was the operations manager, but they said, hey, you're going to be the health and safety officer, and you're going to be the risk management officer. And I remember asking, well, does that come with more money? And they were like, no, it doesn't. And so, but they were trying to get an accreditation. And so they threw me the manual and said, can you help figure this out? And so I did, and I got the organization CARP accredited, not alone, but with a team. but I really led the charge and I enjoyed it. And what I noticed was how it really got the organization rowing in the same direction. And I loved that. And I was learning more about leadership. And so when I joined Northbound, I actually joined as the director of quality and compliance, and just carried over that experience and was helping them go through the same, process with accreditation and licensing. And at Northbound ended up really honing in more operational skills. I eventually ended up becoming the chief operating officer there, and this was over a 10-year period. And I think it was about 6 years in that I became the chief operating officer, but it was such a compliment. They made me a partner in the organization as well too. So I just had a lot of fulfillment and had, gotten my MBA right after joining Northbound, I guess. And so I was just able to get more reps in the treatment industry and practicing leadership. And I can't imagine doing anything else.
That's an incredible journey, and kind of it sounds like you're trying to figure out where you fit best and where your skill set had the greatest benefit to what you were doing. And as a, with an MBA that you have now, I mean, I'm sure you went on to get your MBA, you could have done anything, and yet you chose to still contribute and give back to the recovery industry, which I think is admirable.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Yeah, I was able to join a board called the California Consortium of Addiction Programs and Professionals, and I did that at Northbound. And I actually, when I left Northbound, I was at risk of I was off the board for a little bit because I joined as a program member. And when you join as a program member, you have to be working with a program. I was fortunate enough that another program hired me. And so I've stayed on with them and have helped that organization. And that organization is called Opus Health. And they're also based out of Newport Beach. And I help them with compliance. But I stayed on as a program member, and joining that board it got me more into advocacy, and that's what I really appreciate that you all are doing here, and sharing that message. And after joining the board, I was able to be the committee chair of something called the Addiction Recovery Communities of California. And what that organization does is it helps oversee the accreditation or certification rather of recovery residences throughout California. It's the NAR affiliate for California. And, we're a big proponent of course, safety. And, it's the best thing out there in terms of accreditation or certification for sober living homes or recovery residences. And then we also really gear up every year for the Recovery Happens event, which is actually in California at the Sacramento State Capitol West steps on September 1st, which is coming up. And and September is Recovery Month. And so we help with the planning for that, and then we also get involved with advocacy. And there's another organization that I'm able to be the chair of, and it's called SICARA, and it's a group of organizations, and ARC, my other committee, is a part of that organization, and we really focus on grassroots advocacy through legislation and trying to have a voice at the table. If ever there is the thought of legislation or anything around recovery, we really want to help with that, and where we can provide clarity or assistance and all that. So it's been wonderful. On the advocacy side, we've really had some big wins because in California there's also large pockets of NIMBYism, which means not in my backyard, and stigma, as well too. And you would think with such a progressive state that when it exists, but it really does, both on mental health and substance use disorder. And when I was part owner and operator in the treatment center, the city that we operated in decided to come up with an ordinance that said that you can no longer operate the types of facilities we are operating. And really, at the end of the day, it was a NIMBY and stigmatizing ordinance that that violated the rights of persons in long-term recovery. It essentially told them that persons in long-term recovery cannot live together. And if they want to live together, then they're going to have to only do it in the areas that the city says that that's okay. And you just can't do that with any group of people, much less, people who are protected, they're protected class. And so we've been able to advocate a lot around that and work with these local governments, whether they're willing to hear us or not. But we did get a big win with some of the larger entities that help with funding with local governments, and so some of these ordinances that have been put into place are now being redacted and taken and unwound, and so that's just been wonderful work. But I would consider doing this podcast with you a part of the advocacy work, and that's really raised my higher purpose of spreading the message and helping individuals that are vulnerable and need that help, and just really recovering out loud. It's a statement that, like, you'll see, and I didn't. That's not my quote, but the idea with it is that you share your story and you do it out loud so that people can connect with it, and maybe one day they could recover out loud as well too, and help the people that aren't willing to do that find some identification with it.
Powerful purpose and passion that you have, Devon, and the work that you've been able to do with with not just yourself but with the groups and the boards that you're on is impressive.
Thank you.
I'm wondering how Circa Behavioral Health Solutions falls into all of the work that you're doing, and is that kind of the same kind of work, or does it have a little bit different branch?
Yeah, so Circa Behavioral Healthcare Solutions, when I left Northbound, I was already doing a little bit of consulting on the side, mainly with partners that we were working with. I just got really good at licensing and accreditation over the years, and also really enjoyed consulting on organizational health. And when I formed, it was originally called Wayt Consulting Group, and then in between the DBA to Circa Behavioral Healthcare Solutions. But we formed a team of professionals. We have a nurse on our team, and a counselor, clinician on our team, and other compliance specialists. And we've found very much a higher purpose of helping organizations do better work so that they can be more effective, get better outcomes, and potentially offer services in areas that they didn't offer them before. And so when an organization, whether they're expanding or they're trying to figure out how to lower barriers to access to treatment or improve their services, and oftentimes that can be done through expansions, usually through licensing, but the improvement of services can be done through accreditation or other formats. But again, it's that idea of rowing in the same direction and really stepping up their game in terms of or their performance in terms of having measurable goals that they're working on a regular basis, and getting input from different stakeholders and watching outcomes, and just achieving better results all the way around. So we've gotten so much fulfillment out of helping other providers do that.
And I'm wondering, Devon, as you do all of this work, and you've got your hands at a lot of different plates, but that seems like it's kind of been part of your makeup from the very beginning. Always doing a lot and always being involved in a lot and figuring out how to balance that, those efforts, which is really cool. And in doing all of that, how do you maintain your own sobriety and your own recovery? What does that look like today as opposed to, when you first were in recovery?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking that. It's a great question. So, I do that through participating in my own recovery. Early on, I was fortunate when I was working in treatment and getting into recovery. Or having been in recovery, working in treatment, I realized, and I had people tell me this, they said, you've got to, take care of yourself. Do not make this your recovery. And then I saw some people around me who did that unfortunately had relapsed. And so as unfortunate it is, I just learned from what had happened to them. And so what I do is I have a lot of disciplines in my life, and part of those are, attending the meetings that I go to and staying accountable to the groups that I'm a part of. And when I say accountable, it's like truly being accountable, whether that's to my sponsor or to other, I often will surround myself with a lot of people in recovery, but I have a core group of men that I stay really close with, because when I'm sharing what's going on with me, it's just, I'm close enough with them that we can share anything that we ever need to. So I've got a men's group, and in fact, we meet every Friday morning, and it's really, we call it a mastermind group, and it's a mix of a little bit of recovery and business and all that stuff, but it's really having the disciplines and taking care of myself. And what I can say is, in my journey in recovery, going through programs and perhaps doing the 12 steps or smart recovery or whatever outline that an individual takes, there's many pathways to recovery. My experience is that gets you as far as you want it to. And with me, when I did it, I realized that I had a lot of other work to do as well too, meaning that I had some individual, personal work and stuff from my childhood and stuff from, past relationships. And of course we can do that through treatment, but, I hadn't been in treatment in a really long time. So what I ended up doing was going to a place called Onsite. And at Northbound, we had a wonderful organizational health initiative, and we our culture, and we ended up sending 40% of our staff to a place called Onsite, which is out in Cumberland, Furnace, Tennessee, and it's a wonderful, wonderful program. And they have these intensive workshops, and so you can go there while you're in recovery, and they're just about living in balance, but they really focus in on family of origin and other trauma that you may have experienced. And it just really allowed me to go deeper and to touch on the things that I might have decided not to, left to my own devices. And today I'm a big proponent of being in recovery, but also being very disciplined. I have been vegan for the last 2 years, so that's a discipline that I do just as an example. But another discipline that I do is really trying to watch my thoughts, because as a leader, what I realized is I can show up because I can deal with a lack of self-worth. And so sometimes when I show up trying to be a perfectionist, or having unreasonable expectations of myself or others, or avoiding conflict because I'm a people pleaser and I want everybody to like me. And so I've had to do a lot of work on that. And you have to be careful not to let the pendulum swing too far on the other side of that equation, because that stuff makes me who I am. But what I realized is I was, I have these accounts now that I service, that our team services. And this is just a quick little example. Is the other morning I woke up and one account had stopped using our services, and it was on very good terms and all that. But I was just thinking about it, and I remember I was looking at the clock, and I had been awake for 20 minutes, and I realized I had been thinking about losing this account for 20 minutes from the moment I woke up until that moment when I realized it. And I was getting wrapped into this lack of self-worth, and gosh, what could I have done something better, and what did I do wrong, and all this stuff. And so I unfortunately it went on for 20 minutes, but I tried to be very disciplined with my thoughts, because when I mentioned my grandfather passing away, he passed away of sarcoma cancer, and it was literally a tumor that grew inside of his stomach. And I remember after he passed away, my grandmother unfortunately, they had two of their children die. My dad was the only survivor. One was of disease, and one was of a fatal gunshot accident. And she had told me after he passed away. I remember I was sitting with her that night, the day he passed away, and we were, at the edge of the bed, and we're of Christian faith, and so we had said a prayer and stuff. But she had told me that my grandfather really never forgave God, was the word she used, for his son's passing, and that really, she felt that had contributed to his cancer. And so I can't imagine the thoughts that went through my grandfather's head, throughout the years. And I just really feel like that is the next level, and my responsibility is to try to help individuals that may, go to those negative thoughts or lack of self-worth in being disciplined. And the way I look at it is like a conveyor belt. And I grew up on an apple orchard in that ranch. So I always like to picture apples, and there's all these red apples going down the conveyor belt. And every now and then a green one goes. And if it goes, that's a negative thought. You just flick it off as an example. And so, being really disciplined with my thoughts, it's taken my recovery to a new level, and my performance and my ability to help others on a whole new level.
I love that. I love that concept. Would you do you have specific books around that idea of, I love the visualization of the conveyor belt with the red apples, and if you see a green one, then you got to get rid of that one, that thought. Do you have books that you read that help you grow that concept?
Yeah. I'll actually put in a plug. He's my business partner, but also the gentleman I was doing the podcast with. And he has a coaching firm called Motive for Life, and he wrote a book called The Bug in Our Brain. And it's a wonderful book, and it's a lot about that. I mean, that's the bug, it's the negative thoughts, and it's got a wonderful discipline and exercise within it to help shape and transform somebody's life. But that's one of those books. So it's The Bug in Our Brain by Robert Christensen, and it's available on Amazon.
That's fantastic. I love that. I love anytime we can contribute more information to the concepts and skills that you've talked about on the podcast today. You've certainly brought a lot of wealth of information and experiences to our audience today, and I'm super grateful that you've been willing to take some time with us today and share your experiences, share your recovery story. Super touching, that relationship that you had with your grandfather and his influence on your life, and as well as your parents and the rest of your family, which is it's huge. Family's huge. And so anyway, really thankful for you being willing to share those things with us today. I'd also love to give you the opportunity to maybe share some of your contact information if somebody wants to reach out to you and learn more.
Oh, thank you so much, Shelley. And thank you, Kurt, for the opportunity to be here and share it. But yeah, you can always reach me on LinkedIn. It's Devon Wayt, Devon, and last name is Wayt. And then please look up circabehavioral.com. That's CIRCA behavioral.com. And you'll find our contact information on there. And if there's any listeners that are involved in the treatment or recovery industry, if there's any way we can help you, we certainly will. And if we're not the right firm to help you, we'll certainly find one that is, or make a good referral. So I appreciate you allowing me to do that, Shelley.
Yep, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for what you've contributed. It's been fantastic. I know I'm gonna go read this book, The Bug on the Brain, if I got that title right, but I know I'll go find it and learn some more for myself. I always love increasing my own skills from what I learned from people like you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.